You must remember that the ME intake is influenced by two things. It's influenced by dry matter intake, firstly, but secondly, it's influenced by the DMD of the silages themselves, because higher DMD silages have a higher ME concentration. So you're getting a combination of an effect of intake and the ME concentration of the forage being actually consumed.
Hello, I'm Kieran Lynch and welcome to OviCast, the Teagasc Sheep podcast. Each episode will bring you insights, advice and technical updates for the sheep industry. We're making concluding on many farms our attention turns towards mid-pregnancy. And we asked the question, does nutrition during mid-pregnancy really matter? To discuss this in more detail, we're joined by Dr. Tim Keady, who discusses various aspects from the energy requirements during this phase, the impact of grass supply and feed value in outdoor scenarios, and the impact of different qualities of silage indoors. Tim talks about mobilising reserves, potential condition score loss, and the impact that can have on next year's lamb performance. We finish up discussing feed management, introducing supplement to thinner ewes, and planning for the year ahead.
The key issue about mid-pregnancy nutrition is you want to maintain the ewes as close in body condition as possible. If ewes go into late pregnancy with a poor body condition, you're running into a number of issues which could impact on firstly is lamb birth weight, and we've known from previous studies that if you reduce lamb birth weight, you reduce the weight of weaning, such that a drop of a kilo in lamb birth weight will reduce weaning weight by about 3.3 kilos. It can also have a negative impact on the amount of milk that the ewe will have for lamb growth rate. It can have a negative impact on lamb mortality, and it can also impact on the way energy intake is partitioned post lambing. And by that I mean that if a ewe is in good body condition, she will partition more of her energy intake into milk yield, thus you'll get higher lamb growth rates. But if a ewe is in poor body condition, she will partition energy firstly into replenishing her own body reserves to protect herself, and that will be at the expense of milk yield, which will result in lower lamb growth rate and lower weights of lambs at weaning.
It's not a time of year to take our eye off the ball. Let's put a little bit of numbers around this. What is the energy requirement at the moment? So, we've discussed previously late pregnancy, but in mid-pregnancy where we are at the moment for both smart lamb and flocks.
The major factor that affects ME requirement, metabolizable energy requirement of ewes during mid-pregnancy is actually the weight of the ewe. And it's estimated that the energy requirement of a 70 kilogram, the ME requirement of a 70 kilogram ewe is approximately 9 megajoules of ME intake per day, whereas for an 80 kilogram ewe, it's an ME intake of nearly 10 megajoules per ewe per day, just to maintain body state, body condition score. So to put that into some kind of figures, if you're feeding a 70 DMD silage, and a lot of people think that that's a good silage, but we need to wake up, realize that a 70 DM silage is only average quality silage as far as I'm concerned. That will have an ME of 10.5, so them animals would need to be consuming about 1 kilogram of dry matter per ewe per day just to maintain, to have enough of energy intake to sustain maintenance. And if their ewes are out grazing pasture where they've got adequate amounts of grass available, and considering that grass dry matter at the moment can vary between 10 and 14 degrees, 10 or 14% depending on how wet the grass is and how much surface moisture, that a ewe that wants to consume a kilogram of dry matter per head per day would need to be consuming somewhere in the region of 7 to 10 kilos of fresh grass material per head just to consume enough of energy to maintain themselves at this stage.
I'll just keep you on the outdoor one for a moment. And I think this is something we probably see happen, where sheep get a good run, and just like you said, put the free access to it, even low DMs, there's a possibility of keeping condition on and still maintaining well. But in cases where they're going on the bare pasture, Tim, or being left maybe grazing out the same block for a long period of time, and if the weather turns against it or impacts their ability to consume grass, they're not going to meet that requirement.
We're going to find it extremely difficult. So you've highlighted two situations. One was where they're on bare paddocks, they're not going to meet the requirement. The second is where they may be put onto grass that was conserved since September or October time, and that would have built up a fair bulk of material. And people would think that there's a lot of grass available, which there actually is, but the feed value of that material is declining fast. And we've done a number of studies a few years ago where we looked at the decline in the DMD or the ME concentration of extended grazed herbage, and we found that in December it would be equivalent to about 70 DMD silage. That by mid-January it was equivalent to about 64 DMD silage, and by the end of January it was equivalent to about 60% DMD silage. So there are two issues then with extended grazed herbage: is how much do you allocate them? So our objective would be to allocate between 1.3 and 1.5 kilograms of dry matter per head per day. But the second big issue is, what is the utilization rate? And if ground conditions are wet, or if there's a bad butt in the material, your utilization rate could be as low as 35 to 40%. And if you're going to force these ewes to eat out more than that, you're going to hamper their intake, and you're going to have a negative impact on body condition when it comes to late pregnancy.
I think that's an important point, Tim. Like we often say, in a very wet winter, you can see condition walk off ewes. It's exactly for the reason you just outlined. Tim, if we look at the indoor scenario, or look at the scenario where silage has been supplemented, look, in a lot of cases, it'll be bale silage, some cases precision chop. How does silage quality have an impact on the intake levels, or what kind of intake do you expect?
Silage intake depends on the grass silage feed value, and the major factor affecting grass silage feed value is digestibility, and to a lesser extent the chop length. But let's just focus on digestibility. We've done a number of studies here at Athenry where we've fed sheep different qualities of grass silage in the same studies, and the grass silages in the studies would be approximately 75% DMD with a dry matter of 23-24% precision chopped, and we'd have compared them to average quality silage, which would be 70 DMD precision chopped silage with a dry matter of about 21 to 22%. And to cut a long story short, we found that the sheep that were offered the high quality grass silage could consume in mid-pregnancy up to 1.5 kilos of dry matter per head per day, which would give them an ME intake of about 16-17 megajoules. And whereas the ones getting the average quality grass silage would consume a maximum 1 kilo of dry matter per head per day, which would give them an ME intake of about 10.5 megajoules. You must remember that the ME intake is influenced by two things. It's influenced by dry matter intake, firstly, but secondly, it's influenced by the DMD of the grass silage, of the silages themselves, because higher DMD silages have a higher ME concentration. So you're getting a combination of an effect of intake and the ME concentration of the forage being actually consumed. We've also fed poorer quality grass silages, and you've got intake, particularly when you're kind of bordering mid to late pregnancy, and the intakes will come down to 0.6, 0.7 kilos of dry matter per head per day. And that kind of situation, then these sheep are in negative energy intake.
Just on the choplin, what impact can that have?
Choplin can have if you go back to old studies where they compared single chop with precision chop, it had an effect on intake of approximately 10 to 20%. Now, we've done a study where we looked at bale silage, and there's two factors in this. When we were feeding the bale silage, we allowed for a 5 to 10% weigh back. In other words, the sheep will always sort the silage themselves anyway, so they will eat the leafy material out of it, which is the higher ME concentration, and they leave the stem behind them. So I suppose what I'm trying to say is that when you're feeding bale silage or single chop silage, I wouldn't force them to eat the long stem, and be prepared to remove about 5% of what you fed. And in that kind of situation, there'll be little difference between whether you feed it as big bale or whether you feed it as precision chopped.
No, I get you, and I think that's important. Like we take your figure there a moment ago, where you're feeding that kind of 68 DMD silage was sitting at the national average. You're just about meeting the ME requirement. You're just about meeting the maintenance requirement. So if you force them to graze it or clean it out fully, you're probably dipping a bit below that.
Yeah, I'd say, Kieran, you're actually not meeting the ME requirement in mid-pregnancy with 68 DMD silage. We struggle to do it with 70 DMD silage, but yes, I see where you're coming from.
I want to just maybe put you over another aspect of this in terms of condition score. I know you've measured that some of them studies previously. How big a loss can we see, or how big a mobilisation is there from mid-pregnancy up to, we'll say, lambing?
Let's put it this way. In one particular study where we fed 75 DMD grass silage, and in our studies we would be putting these onto the silages around mid-December, and they would be lambing in the first weeks of March. And in that period of time, the ewes that were on the high quality silage at lambing would be lambing down at a condition score of approximately 4, whereas their comrades that would be on the average quality silage, which is a 72 DMD silage, would be lambing down at approximately 2.9. So that's if in that kind of a study, for it's being fed for a prolonged period of time, you're talking about a difference of up to 1 full unit in body condition score.
Okay, so if we put that in context, the silage is what you have at the moment. You can alter your late pregnancy nutrition, and that's what most flocks out there will do, depending on silage quality. We probably don't consider needing to alter it in mid-pregnancy. So, Tim, if you went in with ewes at the moment, there's some ewes in good condition flocks, there's some ewes that struggle this year. A lot of them will have a cohort of thinner ewes there. We're not going to be able to build condition in late pregnancy. I think that's fair to say. I'll let you comment on that in a moment, but is there an argument for some of them ewes in mid-pregnancy that are thin or are borderline or have other issues to receive some level of supplementation now?
Before I answer that question, Kieran, I mentioned one study with the impact of silage feed value on new body condition score, but we also had a second study that involved 290 ewes, and it was replicated over 3 years. And in this situation, we fed the silages. The good silage was 75% DMD, the average silage was 69% DMD. And at Lammen, the difference in body condition score varied from 3.4 for the high quality silage down to 2.6. So them two studies clearly show that you can have a big difference in new body condition score at the point of Lammen due solely to grass silage feed value, going from what people call a good silage, I call an average of 70 DMD, up to a high quality silage of 75. Now, to answer your question in relation to whether you need supplementation or not, I would start a step before that. I think that when people are feeding silage now and they look at the consequences on body condition score, they should really get their silages analysed to see what is the feed value. Secondly, when the results come back, they should look at what is their silage making practice and start to try and develop a system for next year that they're going to increase the DMD of their silage by a minimum of 5% units to bring it up. Because increasing it by 5% units from our studies show that over a winter period where you house the sheep in mid-December, let lamb them in mid-March, that each 5 units increase in silage digestibility has an effect on new live weight at lambing of 6 kilos, which is equivalent to a half a unit of body condition score. So that's the first thing I do, is look at silage quality, get it analysed, come up with a plan for making better quality silage next year. Now, what do you do now? If you've got bad quality silage and your ewes are in good body condition score, if you have average quality silage and your ewes are in good body condition score, I don't think there's any need for supplementation. However, if you've got some older ewes in the group or ewes that have a body condition score sitting at 2.5 or less, I would be inclined to pull them aside and start to supplement them with up to about 0.5 of a kilo of ration per head per day. That ration can be something simple, such as a straight, such as corn and gluten, but that's okay if you have a big flock of sheep, or it can be a ewe and lamb ration that you would feed and start to supplement them that bit earlier.
Again, and maybe just highlights the need to look at your penance situation as well, and actually handle ewes as well, Tim, if they come in.
Actually, Kieran, you're dead right in what you're saying. You need to look at your penance situation, you need to have adequate feed space, but more importantly, you need to have good feeding management. In other words, that the sheep are getting fresh silage every day, and that any refused material or material left in front of the sheep is removed from them twice weekly to try and encourage them to have a higher intake. If you leave all material there or dead material, it will start to go off you get aerobic deterioration. That's when it starts to heat. That will have a negative effect on fresh silage being put on top, and it will reduce intake quite dramatically and have a negative effect on ewe performance.
Tim, I think that's been a very useful update. Look, I really appreciate you coming on for that.
Thank you.
We'll leave it there for this week's episode. An interesting insight to the impact of nutrition during mid-pregnancy on ewe performance. That's it for me. For updates on our sheep programme, keep an eye on our Twitter page at Teagasc Sheep. I'm Keir Lynch. Thanks for joining us. Don't forget to subscribe and follow us wherever you get your podcasts.